Hello everyone, welcome to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I'm your host Ross Edwards. Today we're going to be talking about a really critical topic in spirituality, and it's the topic of what spiritual teaching can't do. And we're going to be looking at the limits of spiritual teaching and spiritual learning in general. So before we get into that, I would just like to mention that I have new long form episodes every Wednesday and snippets on Thursday, Sunday and Tuesday. These come out at 9 p.m. Central European Time, 8 p.m. UK time and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to subscribe on Apple or Spotify to keep up to date with that. And a quick mention that you can stay up to date with my latest episodes and projects via my newsletter. There's a link in the description, and you can also find links to my books there as well. Just in case you aren't sure, there is the Wednesday episode is the main episode of the week, and then the snippet episodes are taken from that. They're sort of 5 or 10 minutes long, and they just give you like a little piece of the episode. So if you listen to the Wednesday episode, you're getting everything. And then the snippet episodes can reinforce what you've already listened to. Or on the other hand, if you're new and you just want to have a sort of taste of what the Deep Psychology Podcast is about, then you can listen to the snippets and then go into the later ones. So listen, today we're going to be talking about a really crucial topic, and it leads on from everything I've been talking about this month. If you've not listened to any of my episodes this month, there's about 12 of them because of all the snippet episodes. So we've been talking about spirituality. We've been sort of talking about the limitations of spirituality. We've been talking about where people get stuck. We've been talking about what the ultimate fruition of spirituality is. And I think this topic today really knits it all together very nicely, because it really addresses the limitations of spiritual teachings, both for learners and for teachers themselves. So we're going to cover the learner side, and we're going to cover the teacher side of, why is there's a limit to what we can do in terms of spiritual teaching. And it actually goes very profound. This is not just like a logistical problem or a kind of like like a technological problem. This is like this goes to the heart of what spirituality is, and in fact, it goes right to the heart of my own current spiritual path or spiritual life, as it were. So let me kind of set the stage here, because this is actually a very recent problem for me, shall I say, recognizing the limitations of spiritual teaching. So I've been teaching meditation for over 2 years now, and this has come as a result of doing a lot of meditation practice myself. I've been meditating for nearly 10 years now in a lot of different techniques I've learned. I've specialized in sort of one or two areas. I've got certifications in one particular area, and I've been around the block. I've done retreats. I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of people and all the rest of it. And finally, well, I don't want to say finally because that implies an end, but I feel like there's been a real shift in the last 6 months in my spiritual life. And it's had a knock-on effect on my teaching, which I would not have been able to foresee just 2.5 years ago when I started teaching meditation publicly. And it actually has led me to stop running my meditation group, which I used to run in the UK when I lived there, and since I moved to Spain, I've not started one up again. I've been doing the UK one online, but in recent months I've not been doing it, and it's really because of what I'm about to tell you today. So it's tricky to know where to begin with this. What I will say from a teaching point of view is that spiritual teaching is very limited, and at one point in your spiritual path, as a spiritual teacher, I mean, it becomes tricky to uphold. Now, let me explain why. When we communicate, we have to assume that there is a person communicating and there is someone listening, right? You know, if I'm sitting here doing this podcast right now, I have to assume that here I am speaking into the microphone and there you are. I can't see you right now because you might be on the other side of the world, which a lot of my listeners are. A lot of them are in the US. But I have to assume that you're there and you're listening, right? Not only that, I have to assume that I am teaching you something valid. I'm teaching you something that you need to know, and I'm teaching you something that you already do not know. Okay? And in a lot of domains, this is actually kind of just obvious, and it's not a problem, and it's not it doesn't become a hindrance really. Like, for example, if I'm teaching you to play guitar and you're sitting opposite me, and I can see that you're struggling to play the guitar, perhaps. Well, in that case, it doesn't, if I teach you how to play a certain chord, for example, I can quite easily deduce that you don't know how to play that chord because I'll see you trying to play it and you won't be able to, right? So that's kind of obvious. And I can see that I can play it. So immediately there's a gap that's created. There's me, the person that knows the chord, and you, the person that doesn't. And it's quite obvious to both people, probably, unless you're in denial about it as a student. So it's quite clear in an example like that I would have something to give you that you don't already have. And it's also something that it's a skill. It's not something so personal as spirituality. Playing the guitar can be a very personal thing, but ultimately it's a quote unquote external skill. It's a physical thing. It's like something you're doing with an object. And you can think, most, even things like intellectual pursuits, like mathematics, that is the same. That follows the same rules. Really, anything that you can think of, most of the things that we learn in life follow that rubric. Okay. Now, spirituality is not like that. Now, it can seem like that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But fundamentally, it's not like that. Because listen, what is spirituality? I've spoken about this month in my main Wednesday episodes. Go and check out the main Wednesday episodes for like a long explanation of like the ins and outs of this. But spirituality is about discovering who you are. Spirit really just means essence. It means the essence. It means really the essence of experience, the essence of being human, the essence of being you, right? So remember the rubric that I was talking about. When you're a teacher, you have to assume you know something. You have to assume that the student doesn't know that thing. And you have to assume that you're the one that has to tell them, right? There's problems on all those counts when we're talking about spirituality. When you get to the deep levels, before the deep levels, this isn't obvious, but when you get to the deep levels, you realize that yes, you may discover who you are, but you have always been it. And so it's not a discovery in the sense of, if you discover how to play a guitar chord, it genuinely feels like a move forward. It feels like obtaining something. It feels like you're sort of staking out new ground, because it sort of opens up a new world for you on the guitar. You can play new songs, you can write new songs, you can do things you couldn't do before. Now, spirituality, in a way, it does have that component to it, but more fundamentally for me, it feels more like a deep re-owning, a deep embodiment, and a deep grounding in your own experience. And it doesn't feel like, it does feel like a discovery, but it doesn't feel like some sort of like groundbreaking miraculous breakthrough. Of course, in moments it feels like that. If you've ever had a spiritual awakening, you'll realise that it certainly does feel like that. But in the day-to-day sort of living of it, it feels very ordinary, and it feels just like you're coming home. You've come home back to who you really were, when for years you were really just confused about it. It's not that you weren't... This is where language becomes limiting. You weren't fundamentally missing the recognition of who you are. It was maybe something you just overlooked or didn't quite understand. That's the best way I would describe it. And so it doesn't feel like you have achieved something that you can point to and that you can plant, a flag in the ground and say, yes, I've got it now. Whereas with something like learning a guitar chord, it does feel like that. And as a teacher, you sense the gap between you and other guitar players. You can see that there is a gap because you've genuinely developed skills that they haven't, right? And on that note, you cannot really truly express your true nature. If I've tried this month on many occasions, go and listen to the episodes, to express what my true nature is, our true nature, the human true nature is. And it's very difficult to describe it. And when you describe it, you make it into an object. You sort of draw a line around it, and it's like you're trying to put it in your hands and give it to someone, and like package it and wrap it in concepts and give it to someone. Now that fundamentally tarnishes your actual experience of it, which has no boundary to it. It has no edges. Any concept you give it is a concept. It might be a useful concept. We can say openness, we can say boundlessness, we can say clarity, we can say pure perception. You can literally give it hundreds of names, but all these are names. These are not the thing itself, and the thing itself is not an object. It's not a specific object in your awareness, and you cannot draw a line around it and say this is it and conceptualize it and pass it on. And to me, when I do that, I feel like I'm losing part of it. It feels like I'm kind of dissociating from it in a way, because I'm sort of trying to reduce it down into something that it is not, and that makes it lose some of its purity and some of its beauty. So that's one of the problems, is that when you are in touch, you recognize your own spirit, your own true nature. It doesn't feel like an achievement. It doesn't feel like you've got something new, and it's not something you can really conceptualize, and conceptualizing it tarnishes it, right? So that's just one of the, I've talked about this rubric. As a teacher, you need to assume that you've got something. So that we fail on that count right away. Second of all, you have to assume that the student doesn't have something. Now, this is a complicated one. On the most, it's not very superficial, but it's more superficial than the next explanation I'll give you. On the most superficial level, your true nature is your true nature now. It was your true nature yesterday, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, go back as far as you want, and it will still be that 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. People talk about immortality. We're not going to go there right now. because I don't actually know how. I don't know about the subject of immortality. I wouldn't feel qualified to talk about that. What I'm saying is, regardless of whether we're immortal or not, your true nature is continuous and it is there whether you recognize it or not. So it's not like, if you sit down and try and play a guitar chord, it's quite obvious if you cannot play it. And it's obvious that over time your skills in being able to play it, if you practice it, will increase, right? It has this linear quality to it. It has like this start and end quality to it. Your true nature simply does not have that. Because your true nature is your true nature. You have all sorts of ideas about who you are. You have all sorts of ideas about who you are. You might identify with your job, your age, your role. You're a mum, you're a dad, you're a husband, you're a wife, you're a whatever. You might identify with the place you were born. I was born in Scotland, like me. I was born in Scotland. I was born in Scotland in the 90s, right? Or I was, all these ideas. And we can go further than that. I am a person who likes this. I do this at the weekends. I get angry at this. I like that. I dislike that. I like these kind of people. I don't like these kinds of people. We can tell all these stories about who we are. None of these are our true nature because these are stories about who we are, right? And what we actually are, is not a concept. And it's not something that just begins and ends. It is ever present. And so when you're a teacher, you have to assume that the student doesn't know something that they cannot ever truly not know and that has always been present. You see the problem with that? Like, it would be assuming like a world-class musician couldn't play a simple chord on their favourite instrument. Why would you make that assumption? What is your purpose? So that you can teach them the thing that you think they are lacking. And when you recognize your own true nature, your own boundlessness, as I mentioned, this is how I call it in my book that's coming out in about a year's time. I call it boundlessness. The book is called The Boundless Body, so I might just refer to the word boundlessness. When you recognize your own boundlessness, you realize that other people, they do not lack it. They simply do not lack it. Now, do they display behavior that would maybe suggest that they do not fully recognize it? Yes, but the actual experience of it for me is that they are 100% in touch with it, and that their behavior is simply like, the behavior that maybe suggests the opposite is a temporary glitch in the system, in the machine, if you like. Fundamentally, the sort of felt sense of it for me is that other people, they do know. They, if you ask them, hey, do you know, are you in touch with your own boundlessness? They might look at you as if you're crazy and as if you're sort of trying to be a witch or a wizard or some kind of new age, like, I don't know, sage or something. But that doesn't matter, because your true nature is there by default. And so even if you're going to stand there and deny it to me, it doesn't matter to me, because I see it in you, and nothing you can say will stop me. That's one problem, but there's a deeper level to this. There's a deeper level to the problem of other people are lacking it, which isn't a necessary assumption to make in order to teach, which is what I'm getting at here. There's a deeper problem to this, and it's that when you recognize your own true nature, which we can call boundlessness, which is what I call it in the boundless body. I'm just trying to get my words right here. You realize that this includes everyone by default. Your own boundlessness includes everyone. Why? Because it's boundless. And it includes all experience. And you also recognize that the sense that your own boundlessness does not include them is part of your own boundlessness. Let me explain the sort of visceral experience of this, right? Let's say I'm speaking to you, you're sitting opposite me, and we're speaking, having a conversation. And this happens to me a lot, of course. It's kind of like a practice for me, actually, when like a relational meditation practice, shall we call it, even though I don't really think of it in those terms anymore. But anyways, let's say we're sitting opposite. We're sitting opposite each other and we're looking at each other. What you'll usually recognize when you're sitting opposite someone, at least I do, you have to try it for yourself. And again, I don't want to make assumptions about your experience. You'll notice that there literally feels like a distance between you. And I don't mean emotionally, I mean literally like a physical distance. It feels like there's a wall between you, right? Now, before spiritual practice, this seems like it seems so inherent that you don't even realize it's there. It just feels like you're separate from other people, and that is that. There's a wall between you and other people, and that is that. And it's so embedded in the human experience that we don't question it, and so it just feels like that way. You wouldn't even describe it. You wouldn't even like put a name to it. You wouldn't even realize that it's happening. It's just there, right? That is the human experience. When you do spiritual work, one of the things that can happen is you realize that this sense of separation between you and others is simply your own body. It's literally your own body experience. And I mean that quite literally. It's literally just body sensations. And of course, there's mental overlay and there's interpretation going on. But the actual sensation of separation and of a wall between you is literally just your own body. Now, what also happens is that your own body gets enveloped within that boundlessness. The boundlessness isn't just limited to like your visual field or your auditory field. It is everything. It includes your sense of, your mind, your body. Everything you're experiencing gets enveloped within this boundlessness. And of course, it includes other people. And it includes the sense that you are separate from other people. And this is a key point right here. You realize that the sense of self and other, and the sense of separation between you and other people is literally just you. It's just your own perception and nothing else. You uphold it. I don't want to say you choose to like believe in it, because that it's not a conscious choice, and it actually is important developmentally speaking, which I've spoken about. I've done an episode called Self and Other as a Developmental Achievement, so you might want to check that out. That's from February, I believe. It's not that you believe in it, it's more just a habit, and it's something that is literally just, it's within your own body, it's within your own perception, it's within your own experience. And you begin to re-own that, and you begin to sort of see through it more and more. So the problem goes deeper. It then becomes, well, they are actually part of my own boundlessness, and they were never anything else, because my own boundlessness has always been present. And so whenever I've been interacting with other people, they've been included. They are part of my own boundlessness, my own true nature, and they always have been. And it's not, the burden isn't on them. The burden is on me, because I am the one that is perceiving them as other. right? So this is where the teaching thing becomes very problematic. How can you talk about boundlessness as a thing that they cannot know when you literally perceive other people to be part of your own boundlessness? It doesn't really make any sense. I mean, it's kind of like trying to show other people how to breathe. It's like, I can see you're breathing right now, but I'm going to try and teach you how to breathe. That doesn't work, right? Because there's no gap. There's no like skill gap there, you see? And fundamentally, this goes to a deeper point again, which is that when you realize that you're constructing and upholding the sense of self and other, you realize that communication is one of the main ways that you do this. You know, if I'm sitting speaking to you about, it doesn't matter what we're speaking about, I have to assume that you're other to me. Otherwise, why would I speak to you? Like, I mean, I might speak to you because, like, just for the fun of it. But there is, listen, this is a tricky thing to describe. But if you look at our language, it's all built on I, you, he, she, they, we, right? All languages are built on this. And it's simply how language works. So if we want to have a conversation, there's going to be the word I, and there's going to be the word you, and there's going to be the word, these pronouns, and there's going to be they, as though other people we can't see right now are existing. And there's going to be all kinds of implicit assumptions there that we're not really realizing that are happening. And with spiritual work, you start to realize that this whole language thing is a construction. And it is actually, it's not built on like a fundamental, it's not built on the actual raw experience of there not being a self and an other. Like, as soon as you open your mouth and speak, you're creating self and other. And I gave the example of this podcast, and I'm not always aware of it, because sometimes I just start talking and I'm talking and I'm like saying everything I want to say. But sometimes I'm saying something and I'll have like this moment of lucidity where I'll be like, who am I talking to right now? And I don't mean that as in no one listens to the show, because that's not true. I've got over 1,000 listeners a month, in case you were wondering. And it's not the fact that the people that listen to this podcast are all, a lot of you are in the US, a lot of you are in different countries, and even the people that are in where I am, which is in Spain, I don't know who you are, right? I know if you subscribe to my newsletter, a lot of you do, then I'll have seen your name, but that's about it. And a few of you have contacted me and so on, but that's about it. It's not just that though. It's not just, I don't really know exactly who these people are. It goes deeper than that. It's literally a sense of, I'm talking to people that I'm literally just imagining in my mind. Like, literally that's what it feels like to me. And so that is the core issue at the heart of all spiritual teaching, is that to teach, you literally have to construct self and other. And not only that, you have to assume that others don't know their own true nature, and you have to kind of siphon off the fact that they themselves are part of your own boundlessness and therefore do not need to be taught. So it leaves you in quite a conundrum, right? And this is exactly why I've stopped doing my classes, because, listen, to be quite honest, in my classes, we're not at the point where we're speaking about these topics like boundlessness and the loss of self and other and all these, because it doesn't feel advanced when you've understood them, but it goes over a lot of people's heads, right? But This is literally why I've stopped, because I've realized that there's a fundamental limitation here, and it's a limitation I'm not sure that I know how to handle at the moment. So you might be wondering, well, Ross, how does this relate to me as a student? Well, let me say a few things, and then we'll come back to this point later in the episode, because we're going to talk about, what is the limits of being a student. Why I'm telling you this, if you're a student of meditation, if you're a teacher of meditation, it's quite obvious. And the message is basically, well, you basically have to maintain illusions to be a teacher. And that might sound over the top, but it's fundamentally true. As a student, I guess what I would say is that it's just to be aware that teachers are necessarily, even if they're very awake people and they've reached deep spiritual recognition. I'm using the word recognition for reasons I explained last week. So go back to one of the snippets from last week where I talk about the word recognition as a word for spiritual awakening instead of the word enlightenment. Even if a teacher has reached a deep level of spiritual recognition, they have to conceptualize it for you. They have to package it, and they have to do it in a way that it feels like you have to reach something, right? And in one sense, that is true. In one sense, you can certainly live without recognizing your true nature. But on the other hand, for the reasons we've discussed, it tarnishes it, and it sort of dirties the actual pure realization of your true nature. So it's a very problematic position. And as a student, to realize that the way that your teacher discusses, the way that your teacher frames spirituality, the way that your teacher even speaks to you, do they speak to you with respect and with honor and with a basic recognition that you actually know exactly what they're trying to teach you? Because that is the fundamental truth of the matter. Or do they speak to you with derision? Do they make it into like a big climbing Mount Everest project? Do they speak to you as though they're above you and they know something you don't? How does this student-teacher dynamic, or the student-teacher gap, how do they express it, and how do you feel that? Because that you ultimately cannot know another person's level of recognition, but what I would suggest is that the bigger a gap that's made between teacher and student, the less spiritual recognition a teacher actually has. Again, that might be very controversial, but I'm just speaking from my own experience, and I'm speaking honestly because I don't need to teach people. Like, I write my books and I do my podcast and so on, but and in that sense, I do need to teach people because this is like, it underlies my project. But what I'm saying is, like, it's not like my life depends on it, and it's not like I only talk about spirituality, and it's not like I set up this huge sort of mountain to climb. I have done that in the past, but not now. And I've not got a center to run. I've not got like, I don't need to be keeping the lights on with this. Even though I do make income from my work, but it's like the whole thing doesn't depend on me being above my students. To me, it just feels like giving insight, right? It doesn't feel like I'm creating this gap, even though certainly in the past I've operated from it. You see, so that the way you relate to your teacher is directly related to what we're talking about here, because the way they teach you is influenced by how deep they realize what I'm talking about here. And it's interesting because you might ask, well, why do teachers even teach then? And if you're wondering that, you're right. I mean, you're right. And again, this is my dilemma. Why do you teach? If there's nothing to teach and there's nobody outside of you to teach, why would you teach? Well, I can't speak for other teachers. What I can do is sort of speak from my own experience and try and extrapolate that to other people. If I'm being very honest about it, I think a lot of teachers teach because it makes them feel good. You know, when you teach spiritual concepts, you go into a kind of altered state. You kind of, for one thing, you get more into contact with the things you're talking about, and it sort of lifts you. And that can become very addicting. And what happens is the students start to think that is all there is of you. All there is of you is this elevated spiritual being. And they don't see all they don't see all the things like a close partner would see, like someone that you live with. They're not going to see all those things because they don't live with you and they don't see you in all kinds of situations. They see you as a teacher, and so they put you on a pedestal, and you get feedback, and people start to become sort of dependent on you, and they start to like ask you questions, and then you start to give them answers, and then you start to build up this identity of someone that knows something that others don't, right? And it feels good, right? It's quite simple. One of the main reasons that teachers teach is because it feels good. Another reason is because a lot of spiritual traditions, like let's say you become a Buddhist monk, a huge part of being a Buddhist monk is the component of service. Like if you're going to train in like a Mahayana Buddhist tradition, one of the main things you learn is about service and about ethics. And a lot of what you're taught is that when you become enlightened, you have to save as many people as possible. And I'm laughing because to me, I just don't agree with that. Like, for one thing, when you become enlightened, well, there's a problem with even saying that. And I've spoken about this month, so I'm not going to get into that there. You can go and listen back. But it's like, if you have spiritual recognition, why do you need to teach other people? Like, why? That's like kind of like saying, if you're a guitarist, you need to teach other people. When a lot of guitarists will never teach anyone. A lot of the best guitarists are not teachers because they're busy doing gigs and selling records, right? It's like, why? Why would that need to happen? I can understand from a practical point of view and from like in terms of like minimizing the dangers of spiritual work, and in terms of like refining one's own understanding and embodiment, I can understand that. But ultimately it's like, no, you don't. You don't need to teach people. And a lot of people who have spiritual recognition won't teach anyone, and they might never talk about it to anyone. And also the idea of like saving people, it's like getting people off the wheel of, God, I can't remember what it is, like the wheel of karma or the wheel of suffering. It's kind of like the wheel of samsara. I do apologize. It's like, what an assumption to make. Like, how do you know? It's like, how do you know what other people need? And it's not based on the deepest recognition, which is that there is no other. I'm literally quoting, is it Krishnamurti who said that, apparently, is there is no other. Like, literally that stark. There is no other. To save other people, you have to assume that they're other to you, right? So that's like a major problem with that. What am I talking about here ultimately is that teachers are teach because they're taught to teach by their own teacher. And then once they're taught to teach, part of the reason they continue on the spiritual path is so that they can teach other people. And then once they teach, it locks them into like a career, it locks them into, the identity of being a teacher and so on and so forth. And then the actual recognition, like the deepest recognition, whether they have it or not, well, I should be careful with the word deepest. Let's say the recognition of boundlessness and of the non-dual recognition. That might either not come about because teaching is based on duality, it's based on subject-object, or it might just have to be buried. They literally might just have to sort of ignore it or try and like sort of repress it or put it to one side because it conflicts with the teaching process. Because again, how can you teach someone if you perceive them not to be different, to be other to you, and to not lack what you're trying to teach? It doesn't make sense to me. And what you'll find with teachers is that teachers always have wisdom and they have insight to share, but they are always, if you look into, the way they speak and the way they write, they're always teaching according to what they think you don't know. And they actually don't know that. Like, they cannot know that. And that is a construction in their own mind. Like, literally, they construct a you that doesn't know. And they construct like a set of things that you need to know so that they can teach. And I'm being very literal about that. If you write a book on a certain topic, you have to assume that the readers don't know that. And what I've said all along with spirituality in this episode about spirituality is that boundlessness obliterates that. It obliterates that assumption. So it's very problematic. Let's flip the coin now and let's say, or let's turn the tables, as it were, and talk about, what is the limit of learning as a student? What's the limitations of learning as a spiritual student? Well, again, there's many levels to look at this one. Fundamentally, what I've realized recently is that to learn, you have to construct subject and object. To learn, and I'll speak personally right now, to learn, I have to construct the teacher. I mean that I'm being very literal when I say that. I have to sort of imagine a need that I have. I have to imagine that I do not know my own true nature right now. And then I have to go out and then I have to find like a book or a podcast or something. And yes, I still read books and I still listen to podcasts about these topics. I have to do that, and then I have to sit there and listen to them, thinking that they know something I don't. Now, from one perspective, this is okay, but from another, it's really not okay, because my own true nature is ever present, and I cannot not know it. And thinking I don't know it is really a delusion. I used the word tail chasing last week. I said in my Wednesday episode, I said that basically spirituality is essentially tail chasing. It becomes, it becomes obvious that it is essentially tail chasing. It's basically like you trying to find something outside of you, which is impossible. And so as a student, you are literally we can, you have to be careful with how you interpret this, but I'm going to say it in a blunt way and I'm going to explain it. You literally create your teachers. Now, what I'm not saying is that you give birth to your teacher, like you give birth to Eckhart Tolle, or you give birth to Peter Ralston in my case, or I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that these people are not real, or I'm not saying like these people don't exist, because these are things that on an everyday level don't make any sense. But what I'm saying is that you literally create them through your own tail chasing and your own sort of denial of who you are. And who you are is ever present, and it is not a concept. And that's another problem with learning being a spiritual learner, is that all spiritual teaching is conceptual. No matter how good it is, doesn't matter, it could be the best spiritual teaching ever, the most revered verses or lines of poetry or quotes from books. You could do literally a compilation of all the best spiritual quotes ever, the deepest ones from the most deeply recognized or enlightened people in history apparently, and it's all purely conceptual. It's just that all that is words. That is literally all it is. Now, I'm not saying they're not powerful words. What I'm saying is that they are words, and just because of that, they are limited. And at some point, you have to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. And you have to realize that the deepest teacher is, let's call it nounness awareness, let's call it boundless awareness, let's call it non-dual awareness. That is the deepest teacher, because that is who you are, and there's nothing outside of that. And anything you think is outside of it is actually not. And that includes all your teachers and all the books and all the podcasts. It includes your entire spiritual path. So engaging as a student, I'm not saying it's not necessary on a practical level for a certain amount of time, but eventually it becomes a roadblock. And eventually, by definition, it has to be a solo pursuit. The need to have input from other people and to learn from others, it has to burn out at some point. Because if not, you're not really fully 100% in your true nature. Why would you need anyone to tell you about your true nature if you already 100% recognized it? You don't. And when they do, it tarnishes it. Again, it tarnishes it. How can they tell you about your own true nature? Anything they say is based on assumption. I'm not saying it's all wrong and it's useless, but I'm saying it's based on assumption, and it's not you directly experiencing your true nature. And it's conceptual. It's fundamentally limited, you see. And so that's the problem with being a student. The problem of teaching itself is actually, it extends to the problem of being a student, because they're two sides of the same coin, right? You don't lack anything that your teachers are trying to tell you. You might believe you do. You might think you need to seek for another 10 years. And maybe you do. Like, maybe you need to do that. I don't know. I mean, I meditated pretty intensely for 10 years. And it certainly felt like I needed to do that. Until it doesn't. And until maybe meditation is just ingrained into your body and mind, as I've spoken about before. So let me round up here. Teaching spirituality requires making an assumption, and in fact it requires making a slew of assumptions, and it requires overlooking the actual recognition of your own true nature, because your own true nature has no other, and it is boundless, and other people are included in it, not in like, oh, I better include them because nowadays we have to be inclusive and I need to like give lip service. No, what I'm saying is it cannot not include them, because that is just the nature of it. It is boundless and it is all encompassing. It's omnipresent, you might say. It's omniscient, you might say. It's fully seen and fully awake. Nothing exists outside of it. So everyone is included by default. And teaching that doesn't make it. It reaches a point where it doesn't make sense. And so as a student, you have to realize that, and you have to realize that what they're trying to teach you is ultimately something you already have, and all your effort to realize it. It might be necessary, but fundamentally it's not actually. That is not the recognition itself, because the recognition is not conceptual and it's not given by anyone. They cannot give it to you. And this is exactly the dilemma I'm in with my own spiritual teaching. You might be wondering, well, Ross, you've been sitting here for 50 minutes talking about you're talking about the limitations of teaching, but here you are sitting teaching us about this. You see, that's the problem. I don't know what the resolution is. It's why I've sort of held back from giving you like meditation instruction, or like a path to follow, or even I've not really been speaking about spirituality too much. And when I have been, I've basically been saying there's nothing really to realize, right? I don't know what the resolution is. I'm going to keep writing my books and I'm going to keep doing my podcast. But I won't be setting it up as a path. I'll be giving you direct pointers, which are themselves a tarnishing, but they are probably the least tarnishing we can do in terms of spiritual instruction. And overall, I think you might just notice, like, recently I'm not so this whole like transformation thing, and this whole transform your life and become, reach your highest potential. I used to say things like that, and now I'm not going to say things like that, because that requires a lot of assumptions. I'm not saying your life won't change if you listen to me, and I'm not saying that what I'm saying is useless. What I'm saying is that it feels wrong to build it into a path or into a goal, when fundamentally what you actually are, whether you recognize or not, is fullness, boundlessness, wholeness, non-dual awareness, and it cannot be labeled adequately. And actually it is me as well. So you're going to notice a shift in how I deliver things over the next few months, especially if you've been listening for a long time. All right, everyone, I think I've covered this topic in a lot of detail. So for now, I'll just say that remember that I'll have my snippet episodes on Thursday, Sunday and Tuesday, 9 p.m. Central European, 8 p.m. UK, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And a quick mention that you can stay up to date with my latest episodes and projects via my newsletter. There's a link in the description for that, and you can find my books there as well. And I would recommend you go back and listen to all the other March episodes. There's plenty there for you to listen to, because this will all make a lot more sense. If it didn't, it'll make a lot more sense after listening to all of those. So thank you very much. And next month, I'm really excited to be bringing to you a series on science, and a deep philosophical look at the limitations of science and what science really is, and how we can trust it and how we cannot trust it and all that good stuff. So make sure to join me in April. I'm really excited for that. Until then, I'll see you in my snippet episodes and on my newsletter. Take care. See you soon.